What is going on, everybody? This is another episode of your favorite podcast, Evan Ranks. We got a special one. We were able to pull some strings and get some big on-air talent here with a good buddy of mine from college, Jake Yeager. It's actually pronounced Yeager, but every time his Snapchat pops up, my fiance says Yeager instead of Yeager. But Jake Yeager's popping on the podcast for us to give us a wonderful sports podcast here. He suggested it, and you know how it always goes is when you suggest an idea for me, you're going to get thrown on the pod. So we appreciate Jake coming on here, and we're going to get this thing rolling. We will be ranking the worst records / worst teams in all of sports history. Jake, how you doing today?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. Going to talk about some real shitty teams.
There we go. Now, started off, I know we both, when you suggested this, our immediate thought went to the '08 Lions. Can you give us a little rundown on the '08 Lions for everybody listening today?
Yeah, man. So the 2008 Detroit Lions were the first ever team in NFL history to go 0-16. They had Dante Culpepper, Calvin Johnson, Cliff Averill, and Dan Campbell on the team. And as you all know, Dan Campbell is the current head coach of the Lions, so he's just stuck in an infinite loop. They allowed 517 points per the entire season, second worst in NFL history, which comes out to about 33 points per game.
Great day.
Following the 2008 season, the Lions drafted Matt Stafford first overall and then proceeded to go 2-14. So not much turnaround there.
I looked this up. I think Orlovsky was the starting QB for this team, wasn't he?
Yeah, Dan Orlovsky was a starter at one point because you remember that was when he ran out of the back of his own end zone, resulted in a safety against the Cowboys. I think it was.
There you go. They just had a shitty year then. I mean, from making history for one of the worst plays to being literally the worst team.
Mm-hmm.
What was crazy about this team, which is like cool to note, I guess in a way, props to them. They went 4-0 in the preseason.
Yeah, I mean, preseason doesn't mean a whole lot, though, when you consider how it turned out in the long haul.
That is very true. That is very true. Did you mention, I mean, Calvin Johnson was also young, but on this team as well.
Yeah, I mean, he's widely regarded as one of the best to ever do it. And even with that, they couldn't get anything going, Granted, a lot of it was on their defense, who gave up 33 points per game. But, if you're not matching that, you're not keeping the defense off the field so they can get rest, you're not going to be doing a whole lot to begin with.
Yeah, I was looking at, all the stats, the roster, trying to, make sure we could rank this the best we could in terms of who the overall worst team is. And I swear, I don't recognize anybody on that defense. No Hall of Famers, no notable players that had decent seasons. They all just kind of looked like random-ass college kids.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, really the only standout on the defense for me was Cliff Averill. But again, he was a rookie that year, so can't expect a rookie to carry an entire defense like that.
Well, Aiden Hutchinson, I mean, they're doing all right now, but we'll call it a coaching error. Dan Campbell had to go through this shitty season solely so they could make the playoffs this year. They sacrificed everything before for 2024. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's paid off well so far. See how well they can do in the playoffs. I'm really pulling for them, honestly. Probably my favorite team out of the NFC.
Are there any other notable 0-16 teams? Where the Browns went 0-16, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. In 2017, the Cleveland Browns went 0-16. And I want to make sure that I include this fact that in 2016, they went 1-15. So not really a whole lot better.
Two really shitty seasons.
Back to back. Yeah, so to start off the 2017 season, the Browns drafted Myles Garrett with the first pick. And then following that, they drafted David Njoku also in the first round. So they had some pretty solid weapons on both sides of the ball coming out of the draft. The team also included wide receiver Josh Gordon, and we all know so much about Josh Gordon, how his NFL career turned out. The suspensions, the failed drug tests, just couldn't really ever get it going.
Maybe he was supplying the team with drugs, and that's why they did so bad. He laced the Gatorade with acid or something, so all the players just couldn't see the ball, I guess. I don't know, but That I think that might be one of the most notable worst teams. Like we remember the '08 Lions solely because of all the events and players and how shitty they were, but like maybe it's because the Browns were so recent and it was 2 seasons, but like hands down, that's got to be one of the worst coach teams.
Definitely. I mean, there's definitely some recency bias considering how long ago the 2008 Lions team was, but you also got to remember that following this 2017 Brown season, the team took Baker Mayfield in the first round of 2018, first overall. So that kind of marked a turning point for the franchise. And I mean, look at them now. They're bringing back Joe Flacco's career from the dead, going into the playoffs. It's going to be exciting to watch.
I think the course of action there, they should have just had traded for Joe Flacco. I don't think my Ravens would have given him up, but I feel like Joe Flacco could have been that guy to transform that 2017 Browns team from then on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just the way that he's been playing this season in limited appearances, he's still got it in him. You know, he won a ring in Baltimore, multiple playoff berths. People say he's not elite, but I think they're wrong.
He definitely is elite. I think the thing to note about these two teams, I got one more football to bring up with this little duo here, but the thing to note that I wanted to make a point is the '08 Lions and the 17 Browns, including the 16 Browns because they did go 1-15. They all had high quality draft picks, and it's taken them, what is that, 7-8 years to get to where they are. I mean, both teams are in the playoffs now, but it's got to be a coaching issue at that point. Like, there were some notable names that you had mentioned. They couldn't have been too terrible, maybe the '08 Lions, but they're doing okay now. So it makes me think that it was like an internal coaching error. They couldn't utilize their draft picks well. They didn't know how to utilize the rookies, whatever the case was.
Probably some free agent blunders too.
Yeah, I feel like free agency wasn't that crazy back in the day.
No, it's definitely become like a super big deal nowadays, especially with like all the Twitter and Instagram media platforms promoting everything. Just talking about everyone who they think is going to what team, how much they'll sign for, like you were talking about in the contracts episode.
They're following the money, dude. I mean, in to get back into the worst teams, following the money. The '06 Dolphins. This had to have been, the record doesn't show for being one of the worst teams ever. And I don't know how it'll fall in this ranking, but they really internally were, because at the end of that season, they did go 6-10. So it's not like crazy bad. It's still bad, but they lost Drew Brees in the draft. They did not get Drew Brees. And at the end of the season, they lost Nick Saban to Alabama, hence starting Nick Saban's career at Alabama. So, I mean, they just really messed up internally after their poor season. Like, you're not doing terrible, but you've done so bad to where you get a high-quality draft pick and you waste it.
Yeah, so I want to actually backpedal on that. They did not have the chance to draft Drew Brees. He had already been drafted by the Chargers, but they did have a chance to sign him in free agency after the Chargers drafted Phillip Rivers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotcha. All right. That's a studying error on me. I got to get my facts straight, but
Yeah, but I mean, seriously, that Lions team, the year before they won like 6 straight games to end the season, finished 9-7, were projected to be playoff favorites, and then just total blunder. You know, didn't get Drew Brees, had to make do with what they could get. You know, really all they had was Jason Taylor to carry the team.
that Dolphins team, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, they had Jason Taylor actually put up some pretty decent numbers throughout that season. I don't know if this is an average. Like, he got 13 sacks. He had 2 picks and 2 fumble recoveries. I mean, I'd say that's a pretty high quality defense when most likely they were on the field like 90% of the time, and he was needing oxygen about 90% of the time as well.
yeah. I mean, they definitely could have been the 0-16 team before Detroit if Jason Taylor wasn't on the team.
My thought process through this team, we were looking at the rosters before we went on here, and you pointed out Marcus Vick, and yes, he's older than He's older than Mike Vick,
Let me double check that actually.
or they're around the same age. Like, I feel like there would have been some cross there. Maybe Marcus Vick, he was a rookie that year. And I feel like the name could have carried. If you're doing that bad, just throw him out there and maybe make some revenue from people trying to come see the dogfighter's brother out there. But this was also Wes Welker's one of his early years in the NFL, and he actually did pretty decent as well. I'm looking at some other names here. Dante Culpepper was on the IR. I know you had mentioned him on that Lions team. Uh, that would have sucked. Could you imagine being on a 6-10 Dolphins team that loses their head coach, loses out on the free agent of Drew Brees, and then goes to this '08 Lions team where they just don't win a single game?
Yeah, it's just bad luck all around for Dante Culpepper. I mean,
Maybe
he
he's the
was pretty
curse.
stout. Go ahead.
I said maybe he's the curse.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, he was pretty stout when he played for Minnesota, but just kind of went downhill after that.
That's true. That's true. All right, we got some good 3 football teams in here. I think there kind of is a clear winner of that little, we'll call it a bracket, just going on the ranking side of things. But let's move on here to some baseball. How about them O's?
Dude, them O's, man.
I don't
Long
want to talk
time.
about them because that's my MLB team. So I'm gonna let you handle the bulk of shit talking my Orioles in 2018.
Dude, I feel your pain, though. Long stretch of terrible. Start off with the 2018 season, they went 47 and 115. And in the 4 seasons following that, they were 500 or worse. Finally, they pulled it out last season. 100 wins, made the playoffs. They had pretty stacked team in 2018, though. They had Chris Davis, Kevin Gausman, Manny Machado, and Adam Jones. They just couldn't put it together.
That's honestly one of my favorite teams, if I'm being honest. I mean, aside from the most recent one, just because it's a bunch of young bucks proving their worth and they're doing really well. But like that squad was a good squad, just had terrible outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, that was, what was it, a couple years after Chris Davis signed that big extension that you guys talked about on the last episode.
Yup.
Manny Machado is still kicking ass in the MLB. He's still with San Diego, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Adam Jones, one of the best in the game at the time, just couldn't put it together. I mean, the team had a 239 batting average with 188 home runs, and pitching wasn't much better. They had 5.18 ERA and only 1,200 strikeouts, which is pretty low for an average team in that league in this era.
I feel like we got to give the Orioles some props here, though. They had a decent squad. They're in arguably during that time, too. I mean, that's like the heart of ball. Well, not heart, but like that's when the Yankees and the Red Sox were battling it out. I mean, the Blue Jays were probably piss poor, and
Tampa Bay was
the
up in there. The
like
Astros too.
you're in a good division though. So I mean, I gotta kind of pull away from them being too terrible. Their record was awful, but they had a decent squad. I think it was just didn't go their way. They were fighting for draft picks.
Hey, those draft picks have worked out though. They've built the farm. They've built the roster through the farm. They're looking up. Things are looking good. Need some big free agent splashes over the next couple of years, but I think they could be legit contenders in the future.
I got some high hopes for them. I think compared to our next one, which would be the '08 Detroit Lions, those Orioles would definitely kick their ass. I mean, looking at the starting roster for the '08 Lions, they had notable names would be Dimitri Young, who definitely is not going into the Hall of Fame, Alex Sanchez, who was it? Carlos Pena was in there, Brandon Inge, and AJ Hinge, who is actually the current manager for the Tigers. We got another one like Dan Campbell. I guess you got to go through struggles to get to where you're at, but they still suck. So I don't think he's got an excuse.
Yeah, they haven't had much luck. The '03 Tigers are pretty bad. I can't remember what their record was off the top of my head.
43 and 119.
Damn.
ERA was 5.3, and their team batting average was 2.4, or I guess 0.240, whatever it is, 240. So, I mean, they weren't doing anything offensively or from what it looks like from some of the box scores defensively either. I mean, I didn't recognize hardly any pitchers on that team. And I guess some of the guys that I mentioned, they were like decent, but not notable, I guess, in terms of overall for their entire career.
Yeah, definitely not franchise cornerstones that you want to try and build around to go into the into the postseason with.
Frankly, I think the only reason some of those names are notable is because on the Wii, I used to play, it was called MLB Power Pros, and it was from 2008. So they had some of these names, and I think that's the only reason I know who the hell these people are.
Yeah,
But
man, those old games were so great. Like, you remember it was the NFL Street Yard or whatever the hell it was. You literally
yeah,
beat the
NFL
brakes off of
Street,
somebody. Yeah, those
that was
games
a
were
good
crazy.
one. While we're on the topic of old, how about 1935? The 1935 Boston Braves. This was, I guess, before they had like a longer season. No, I guess it goes into the amount of games. They went 38 and 115. The only reason I want to bring them up is because they had Babe Ruth on this team. I don't know if it was a marketing ploy because Babe Ruth was at the time 40 years old and only played in 28 games. We're talking about the great Bambino. He only had 6 home runs in those 28 games. Maybe that's why they were so bad, but like I feel like during that time in 1935, you had to be a little bit better than this to compete. Like there's no way the talent pool for the MLB at that time is worthy of 38 wins.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about the guys they had in that era. You know, it was at 1935, so Ted Williams, uh, Mickey Mantle, maybe Lou Gehrig, maybe, kind of guessing on the eras, but like for a team to go that route and play that poorly is just not good look, not at all.
It's rough. It's rough, dude. I don't know how it compares. I know you had the what are the Sharks? What city are they in? San Jose?
Yeah, San Jose Sharks from 1992, 11-71-2 record, one of the worst in NHL history. To
They
be
play
fair,
that many
though,
games?
oh yeah, they play quite a few games. To be fair, though, I will give them a break as this was only their second season in the league.
I think
Uh,
I read that. They were like an expansion team or something.
yeah, yeah. They did have some pretty big milestones this season, though. They had Rod Gaudreau with the first hat trick in franchise history. For those who aren't too familiar with hockey, a hat trick is 3 goals in one game. And they had rookie Arturs Urbe with the first shutout in franchise history. So he didn't allow a single goal.
Damn.
Yeah, so all in all, not too bad, not too great. However, this team stats line kind of pushes the line to not too great. They allowed 414 goals while only scoring 218 themselves. So that's almost 200 in differential there.
I I think this one I feel like we got to give them a pass because they were an expanded team. Like you look at the expanded teams, and I'm not a big NHL guy, but I have paid somewhat attention to it. Like the the Las Vegas Golden Knights. Like they were in the
Yeah.
Stanley Cup the other year. That's an expansion team. Like I guess we learned from our mistakes, but they've given the expansion teams so much more room to be successful now than I feel like they did then.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Sharks, it was 2018 was their first, or not the Sharks, the Golden Knights was the first season was 2018, and they made it all the way to the Stanley Cup final before losing to the Capitals. And then just this past season, 2023, they finally won the Stanley Cup. So about 5 years of existence, finally made the cup, you know, finally won it. But then you have to think about like Seattle, who had the same kind of benefits that the Golden Knights got when they were given an expansion team, and they kind of just flopped on the expansion draft. Really started off poorly. I don't know. I haven't been paying attention too much to them this season because my New York Rangers are balling out.
There you go.
But Seattle is not looking too hot. They did just win the Winter Classic though. That was big.
You gotta have at least something to be happy about, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna sum this up with the most recent one here, the Detroit Pistons. I mean, having the notably worst consecutive losing streak. I think that's just an NBA. I don't know if this goes for all of sports, but they lost 28 games straight. And I'm looking at this team. It doesn't look like a bad team. I mean, Nerlens Noel, who may or may not be washed. We got to give my guy Braxton Key a shout out from UVA. He's sitting on the team. Kevin Knox, your boy from the New York Knicks, is on there. They got some high draft picks here in Jaden Ivey out of Purdue. That was a couple years ago. Cade Cunningham. They got Marvin Bagley in a trade. He was a high draft pick at one point. Uh, those are good names. Like Killian Hayes as well. They have that new rookie, whatever his name is. I can't remember, but they have a good squad. I don't know what's happened there, but that is a lot of games to lose. Like they're currently 3-30.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big point in that is, a lot of these guys are so young, they just need to develop properly. And in an NBA league like this, where high flying, high offense, not a lot of defense, it's just hard to develop because you're trying to focus on your shots, but sometimes they're not hitting and you get cold and then you start to lose confidence. So,
I mean,
hope
yeah,
these young guys.
I'm looking at speaking of young guys, I'm looking at this roster right now, and it looks like the oldest person on the roster was, you got a 1989 guy and Bojan Bogdanovic, and then the rest are like 1998, 1999, and 2000 plus.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of these young guys are just learning how the game goes. Can't really figure it out unless you're playing in the games.
Now, since this is like a more recent one and their season's still going on, it's not a defined. I mean, for all we know, they could win out the rest of the season. We don't know. Do you see it being successful for these guys that are so young losing this much, or can you see like all of them being busts?
I really think it depends on the coaching and who's putting together the roster every day. If they can really lock in, I think a lot of them could be some stars. I don't know if they'll stay with Detroit, but I think with the right team, they could be stars.
Got you. All right. Well, I'm eager to get your ranking on this. I feel like let's do a little bit of a joint one so we can kind of figure out where both of us feel that these lies. We're going to start with 5. So 5 is bad, but definitely not the worst. Who would you say would get the number 5 ranking?
I would definitely say the Pistons. Part of it is because their season is still going on. For all we know, this could come back to bite us in the ass. But right now, and especially because they're so young, there's too much up in the air to consider them one of the worst teams of all time.
All right. I like that there. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I kind of want to put the Dolphins at 4.
No, I agree with that.
I don't think. Go ahead.
They had a terrible season. They missed out on Drew Brees. Nick Saban left to go to Alabama. But as far as the teams we've ranked go, they definitely weren't the worst.
That's what I was going to say. I'm looking at the ones we talked about, and I was like, all right, I could put the O's in there, but the O's had arguably, out of all these teams, the best roster. So, like, I feel like the Dolphins just kind of fit right there the best. I think we kind of both know what 1 and 2 are. I myself would put the Tigers at 3. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would definitely put the Tigers at 3. I mean, it was at the time one of the worst records in MLB history, only to beat out by one other team.
Not to mention their roster was just a bunch of misfits. I mean, none of those guys are going into the Hall of Fame. It wasn't like there was a key player to be like, oh, well, this guy, like the O's had a handful of guys that are good that Adam Jones might be a Hall of Famer. But this Tigers team, you look through it, and if you're an avid sports fan, not many pop out at you.
Yeah, and it wasn't even until 2008 when the Detroit Tigers signed Miguel Cabrera that they really started turning things around.
Yeah, that's 5 years after this. So they still had a lot of losses, I'm sure, in that meantime.
Exactly.
All right. The notable 1 and 2. I feel like these are interchangeable. So since you're the guest on the podcast, I'm going to let you give me your 2 and 1 rankings as for the worst sports teams in history.
For number 2, I'm going to say the Sharks. They were an expansion team. They definitely had some firsts, some exciting things, but to give up almost double what you're scoring is just something that can't happen. If you're scoring 200 goals and giving up 400, you're doing something wrong. It doesn't matter how new your team is or how old your team is, what you have on your roster. There are things that need to be looked at from top to bottom to make sure this never happens again.
All right, I like that. I think if we're taking the Sharks there, I'm going to swap out number 4, and I think depending on who you say for number 1 is who I'll put there. Who you got for number 1?
Number one, I'd probably put the Cleveland Browns. I mean, yeah, they went 0-16 second to Detroit, but the fact that they went 1-15 and then 0-16, it was just top to bottom from the front office to the secretary of water or whatever the hell. Like they just did not know what they were doing. Terrible organization, terribly run. They did have some good picks to compensate, finally turn things around, but you can't go 1-31 over 2 years and expect you not to be one of the worst teams of all time.
I mean, that record's worse than the 3-30 Detroit Pistons right now, and that was over 2 years. So I know games you play more and less, but 1-31 definitely would take the cake out of number 1 ranking. If we're putting them there, I think we swap the Dolphins out for the Lions just because the Lions were atrocious as well in all shape or form. Their record was worse than the Dolphins. Names weren't too notable enough, but you had notable names and still did terrible.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you also have to think about the fact that after Detroit went 0-16, at least they went 2-14. So they have one more win than the Browns did.
There you go. All right. I like that. And I don't know if you've tuned into any of the recent podcasts, but I'm going to run through the summary here. So ultimately, number 5 goes to the Pistons, number 4 to the Lions, 3 to the Tigers, 2 to the Sharks, and then number 1 ranking for worst ever team goes to the the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns. All right. And then the newest segment that I've been integrating, I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you don't have anything, that's okay. But it's a segment called Stranger of the Day. It can be a positive stranger or a negative stranger, but give me your stranger of the day.
Yeah. So I was at the gym earlier today getting a workout in, and this guy walks into the gym and he's wearing a T-shirt that has Barney and Friends on the front, and it says "commit tax fraud" on it. I just thought that was so hilarious.
That's a good stranger of the day, honestly.
Yeah, he's definitely the stranger of the day in my eyes.
Shout out to the stranger of the day and Barney and Friends, I guess. But that's going to do it all for this podcast. I cannot thank you enough for popping on here, man. I love having guests on here. I feel like it makes it a little bit easier on me, but also interesting to our listeners. I mean, not many of my friends back home know you. So it's nice to get your insight on these as well. So I can't thank you enough for popping on here, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. It was a great time.
Of course. And before we close out, we're going to thank the podcast sponsor. Podcast sponsor is Walker's Home Services for all your home service needs. Thank you to Walker's Home Services for not donating any money, but for some reason sponsoring the pod. But that's going to do it all for Evan Ranks. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you all in the next one.